my name is Medona. When my neighbor said, shut up, my name is Medona. Yes, spelled with an E. My mother was a huge fan of the legendary pop star Madonna. But the nurse at the local clinic made a slight spelling error on my birth certificate. Regardless of the spelling, I always believed I inherited the iconic singer's dramatic flair, her vocal cords, and her absolute refusal to live a quiet, boring life. I am the kind of person who believes that life is a grand musical, and I am the lead actress. I live in a cozy, vibrant apartment complex on the 3rd floor. My mornings begin with loud, upbeat music. My afternoons involve enthusiastic salsa routines in the living room, and my evenings are spent talking on the speakerphone while vigorously chopping onions for spicy curries. To me, noise is just the sound of a life well lived. To my next door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, it was a daily torment. The grumpy neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, was a retired librarian whose face perpetually looked as though she had just bitten into a very sour lemon. She was a woman who valued absolute, pin-drop silence. If a leaf fell too loudly on her balcony, she would glare at the tree. We were total opposites. I wore bright, neon floral dresses. She wore beige cardigans. I laughed with my whole chest. She communicated mostly through disapproving sighs and aggressive throat clearing. For the first 6 months of living next to each other, we existed in a state of cold, passive-aggressive warfare. I would sing, and she would occasionally tap on the shared wall with what sounded like the handle of a broom. But I always ignored it. After all, my name is Medona. A superstar does not let the haters dim her shine. The incident, it happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was in an exceptionally good mood because I had just found the perfect recipe for a garlic butter roast chicken. Naturally, cooking such a masterpiece required an epic soundtrack. I connected my phone to my Bluetooth speaker, cranked the volume up to maximum, and blasted Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive." I wasn't just cooking, I was performing. I was using a wooden spoon as a microphone, twirling around the kitchen island, and belting out the lyrics with the passion of a woman who had just won a Grammy. At first I was afraid, I was petrified. I screamed, tossing a dash of salt into the pan. I spun around, slid across the freshly mopped floor in my fuzzy socks, and hit the high note just as I passed the open kitchen window. Suddenly, a voice shattered my solo. It didn't come from the music. It came from the balcony right next to mine. "Shut UP." The shout was so loud, so furious, and so incredibly unexpected that I dropped my wooden spoon. It clattered against the tiles. I scrambled to pause the music, my heart pounding against my ribs. I slowly poked my head out of my window. There she was, Mrs. Higgins. She was leaning over her balcony railing, her face flushed completely red, a watering can trembling in her hand. "For the love of all that is good in this world, Medona, please, just shut UP. she yelled, her voice cracking with a mix of rage and something else I couldn't quite place. I cannot take it anymore. The singing, the stomping, the endless racket. Just be quiet. She didn't even wait for my response. She spun around, marched back into her apartment, and slammed her glass door so hard I thought it would shatter. The ego and the guilt. I stood frozen in my kitchen. The silence that followed was deafening. At first, I was furious. My cheeks burned with indignation. How dare she, I thought. My name is Medona. I have the voice of an angel. I pay my rent just like she does. And if I want to sing while I cook my garlic chicken, I have every right to do so. I paced around my apartment for an hour, drafting angry, dramatic speeches in my head. I was going to march over there, knock on her door, and demand an apology. I was going to tell her that she was a miserable old bat who didn't know how to enjoy life. But as the adrenaline faded, something else crept in. Guilt. I replayed the moment in my head. Mrs. Higgins had been angry, yes, but her voice had cracked. Her hands had been shaking. She hadn't just looked annoyed, she looked exhausted. Deeply, profoundly exhausted. I looked at the shared wall. Maybe I was a bit too loud. Maybe not everyone wanted front row tickets to the Madonna daily concert. The peace offering later that evening, after my kitchen was clean and the chicken was perfectly roasted, I made a decision. I plated up a generous portion of the roast chicken, added some buttery mashed potatoes, and covered it neatly with foil. I walked out of my front door and stood in front of hers. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my bright yellow dress, and knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Mrs. Higgins. It's Medona. A moment later, I heard the clicking of locks. The door opened just a crack, and Mrs. Higgins peered out. She looked even more tired than before. Her eyes were red, and she was wearing her thickest beige cardigan. "What is it?" she asked defensively, clearly bracing herself for an argument. "I didn't come to yell," I said softly, holding out the warm plate of food. "I brought you dinner, and I came to apologize." Mrs. Higgins blinked, clearly taken aback. She stared at the full-covered plate, then up at my face. The hostility in her eyes slowly melted into confusion. I didn't realize how loud I was being. I continued, speaking in a gentle voice I rarely used. "I'm sorry I disturbed you. I know I can be a lot to handle sometimes." Mrs. Higgins opened the door a little wider. She looked at the plate again, and to my absolute shock, a single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "Oh, dear," she whispered, quickly wiping it away. "No, I should apologize to you. I shouldn't have screamed like that. It was terribly rude of me." She stepped back and opened the door fully. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" The truth behind the silence. I sat in Mrs. Higgins' living room. It was exactly as I had imagined. Beige, tidy, and incredibly quiet. But as we drank our tea and shared the roast chicken, the silence felt less like a punishment and more like a comfort. She explained to me that she wasn't just a grumpy old woman who hated music. She had been suffering from severe migraines for the past few weeks, brought on by the stress of her older sister falling ill in another city. She was worried sick, sleeping poorly, and my daily salsa routines and karaoke sessions were literally making her head pound. I do actually like Gloria Gaynor, she admitted with a weak, shy smile, taking a bite of the chicken. I just prefer her at a volume level lower than a jet engine. I laughed out loud, but quickly covered my mouth to keep the volume down. I promise from now on, the jet engine will only be switched on when you're not home. Thank you, Medona, she smiled. And this time, it was a genuine, warm expression. And this chicken is absolutely wonderful. A new rhythm from that day on. Things changed between me and my neighbor. My name is still Medona, and I am still the loud, dramatic, colorful superstar of my own life. I still cook spicy curries, and I still dance in my living room. But now, I wear headphones when I do my salsa routines. I keep the speakerphone volume on low. And once a week, I turn off the music entirely, bake some cookies or roast a chicken, and knock on Mrs. Higgins' door. Sometimes, the best performance isn't the one where you hit the highest note or sing the loudest. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is just sit in the quiet with a friend. A few months slipped by, and our new rhythm settled into a comfortable routine. The hallway between our apartments was no longer a demilitarized zone. It was a bridge. Then came the great monsoon storm of July. It was a Friday night. The rain was lashing against the windows like a furious drummer, and the wind was howling with a theatricality that even I had to respect. I was right in the middle of painting my toenails a blinding shade of fuchsia when, with a loud pop, the entire building plunged into absolute darkness. The power was out. At first, I didn't mind. I fumbled around, lit a few vanilla-scented candles, and tried to enjoy the moody atmosphere. But after 30 minutes, the silence of the powerless apartment, save for the roaring storm outside, started to feel heavy. My phone battery was at 12%, and the internet was down. Suddenly, a thought struck me. Mrs. Higgins. If I was feeling a little spooked by the dark, how was she doing all alone next door? A rescue mission in fuzzy slippers, I grabbed my heavy-duty emergency flashlight, a packet of chocolate digestive biscuits, and a thermos of leftover chai I had made earlier. I padded out into the pitch-black hallway in my fuzzy slippers and knocked gently on her door. Mrs. Higgins, it's Medona. Are you all right in there? I heard the slow shuffle of feet, and the door creaked open. Mrs. Higgins stood there, illuminated by the frail, flickering light of a single, tiny tea light candle. She looked remarkably small in the shadows. Medona, she breathed a sigh of relief. My main flashlight seems to have died, and I only have these little tea candles. It's quite dark, isn't it? Fear not, I announced, clicking on my massive flashlight and casting a bright beam across her beige living room. The neighborhood rescue squad is here, and I brought biscuits. She chuckled a real, genuine chuckle and stepped aside to let me in. Shadows and secrets, we sat on her plush sofa. The flashlight pointed at the ceiling to fill the room with a soft, diffused glow. We drank the lukewarm chai and munched on the biscuits while the storm raged outside. Without the hum of the refrigerator, the glow of the television, or the ticking of the digital clock, the apartment was intimately quiet. But this time, the silence wasn't tense. It was an invitation. You know, Mrs. Higgins said softly, tracing the rim of her teacup, I wasn't always this boring. I paused mid-chew. I never said you were boring. Oh, you didn't have to, dear. I know how I look. A fussy old librarian in beige cardigans. She smiled wistfully. But when my husband, Arthur, was alive, we used to go dancing. My jaw dropped. Dancing. Like ballroom, swing, even a little bit of salsa, she said, her eyes twinkling in the dim light. Arthur had 2 left feet, bless him, but he loved the music. We would play records until midnight. The house was always so loud, so full of life. She looked down at her hands. When he passed away, the music just stopped. The quiet was the only thing that felt safe. I suppose I got so used to the silence that any sudden noise felt like an intrusion on my grief. I let myself become a grumpy old woman. My heart ached. I reached out and gently squeezed her hand. You aren't just a grumpy old woman, Mrs. Higgins. You're just a woman who loved someone very much, I said quietly. A different kind of performance. We sat in a comfortable silence for a few more minutes. The storm outside seemed to be calming down, the angry thunder rolling away into a gentle hum of rain. Then Mrs. Higgins looked up at me with a shy expression. Medona, yes, you have a lovely voice. I know I yelled at you that day, but I did hear you singing before the shout. She hesitated. Would you mind singing something now? Just softly, to pass the time. I couldn't believe my ears. The woman who had literally screamed, "Shut up," at me, was now requesting a private concert. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a backing track. And I didn't need to hit the highest, most dramatic notes. I cleared my throat softly, smiled, and began to sing an old, gentle jazz standard. My voice filled the small, candlelit room, not as a booming declaration of my own ego, but as a bridge between 2 very different women who had found a way to share the dark. When the power finally flickered back on an hour later, blinding us with the overhead lights, we both groaned and laughed. The magic of the dark was broken, but something else had been permanently fixed. My name is Medona. I am still a superstar, but I finally learned that the best audience doesn't always need to be a crowded stadium. Sometimes a single friend in a beige cardigan is all you really need. Life had reached a beautiful equilibrium. I was still Medona, though I was now a Medona who owned several pairs of high-quality, noise-canceling headphones. Mrs. Higgins had even started wearing a touch of lavender in her cardigans. We were the dynamic duo of Floor 3. But as they say in the movies, just when you think you've reached the happily ever after, the scriptwriter throws in a plot twist. Our plot twist arrived in the form of a heavy, mahogany-stained moving crate and a young man named Victor who moved into the apartment directly above us. The rhythm of the night and morning and afternoon. Within 24 hours of Victor's arrival, the peace was shattered. But it wasn't singing. It wasn't salsa. It was thump, 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 clack. It sounded like a giant was playing basketball in his living room. Or perhaps he was practicing his Lord of the Dance routine on a hollow floor. From 7:00 a.m. until nearly midnight, the ceiling would vibrate with a rhythmic, mechanical thudding. I saw Mrs. Higgins in the hallway on Wednesday. Her sour lemon face was back, but this time it was directed upward at the ceiling. "Medona," she whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "It sounds like he's building a bridge up there. Or perhaps he's housing a small elephant. I haven't slept in 2 days." I felt a surge of protective fury. I was the quietish Medona now, and I had worked hard to create this peaceful atmosphere. If anyone was going to be the loud one in this building, it was going to be me, not some mystery thumper. "Don't worry, Mrs. H," I said, adjusting my neon pink headband. "I'll handle this. I'll go talk to him." The encounter, I marched up the stairs to floor 4 and pounded on the door of 4B, thump, 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 clack. The noise stopped. The door opened to reveal a tall, lanky young man with messy hair and thick glasses. He was wearing a vintage t-shirt that said "Silence is golden." The irony almost made me scream, and he looked incredibly distracted. "Hi, I'm Medona from 3B, I said, skipping the pleasantries. "And I'm here on behalf of the entire 3rd floor to ask, what on earth are you doing? Are you training a horse? Are you building a catapult?" Victor blinked, looking confused. "Oh, hi. No. I'm an inventor. Well, a student inventor. I'm working on a prototype for a kinetic energy harvesting floor tile. It's meant to generate electricity from footsteps." I stared at him. "Well, your kinetic energy is generating a headache for Mrs. Higgins and a fury for me." "It's too loud, Victor." He looked genuinely horrified. Oh no, I thought. I thought because I put down a rug, it would be fine. "I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to finish this for the regional science fair on Saturday. If I don't win the scholarship, I can't stay in school." The Medona strategy. I went back down to Mrs. Higgins' apartment and explained the situation. We sat at her kitchen table, the occasional clack echoing from above. "The poor boy is trying to get a scholarship," Mrs. Higgins sighed, her librarian heart softening. But my head, I can't take 3 more days of it. I looked at her. I looked at the ceiling. Then the Medona brain started working. Mrs. Higgins, I said, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. Do you still have those old heavy-duty yoga mats you bought back in the 90s when you tried to find your zen? I do. There in the back of the hall closet. Why, and I have 4 packs of thick acoustic foam I bought back when I thought I was going to record my own album, I added. The soundproof lab 10 minutes later. Medona and Mrs. Higgins, the unlikely duo, were back at 4B. We spent the next 2 hours helping Victor line his testing area with layers of yoga mats and acoustic foam. Mrs. Higgins even brought her old, heavy velvet curtains to hang over the door. Try it now, I commanded. Victor stepped onto his prototype tile and jumped. F-wump. It was a dull, soft sound, hardly audible. It works. Victor cheered, jumping again. You guys are geniuses. No, I corrected him, striking a pose. We are just good neighbors. And I am Medona. The grand finale on Saturday. Victor won the scholarship. To celebrate, he invited us both to dinner at a quiet little bistro around the corner. We sat there, the inventor, the former librarian, and the aspiring superstar. I learned something this week, Victor said, lifting his glass of lemonade. Science is great, but it's nothing without community. Mrs. Higgins smiled, her lavender cardigan glowing in the soft light. And I learned that sometimes the things that annoy us the most are just people trying to find their own way to shine. I leaned back, feeling incredibly satisfied, and I learned that I look great in a tool belt. As we walked back to our building, I didn't feel the need to sing. I didn't need to be the loudest person in the room to feel like a star. I realized that my name, even with the E, suited me perfectly. I was a different kind of icon now. I was the woman who turned a shut up into a hello, and a thump into a thank you. And as we entered our lobby, the only sound was the gentle clicking of our shoes on the floor, a perfect, quiet rhythm that sounded exactly like home. T. Hank, you subscribe my channel.